guys, welcome back to Kai Dragon Gardening and Cooking. It's been a while, but weather is still really nice out here. So today we're going to talk about planting your garden beds. As we've talked in the prior video, there's different types of garden beds, shapes, sizes, height. It all just kind of depends on what you want to do. But there's a lot of pre-planting stages that go into planting your garden beds. Here, as I've laid it out here long ago, this was a grow bed that we made enough room for wheelbarrows to go through. These were the cheaper beds. These were the ones during COVID that I acquired that were maybe about a foot, 10 inches tall, and we set them up to basically have our own contained soil. The thing with each of these is they all have their pros and cons, and when I first did it, I went the cheap method. But there was one important thing that I always made sure I'd maintain when doing this. You have to have walk space for your wheelbarrow, for yourself, for anybody else coming through here. If you do not have roughly a little over 3 feet, you will find that you will have a hard time getting through here with your tools if you need to put in new bags of dirt, put in new compost. You've got to have room to do it. How I would recommend doing this, if you don't have anything set up yet, is to get some stakes. And then you take those stakes and you get some yellow string or any type of string that's cheap, and you start laying out, measuring it out. A lot of the dimensions of these beds will be on the box. You can get them on Amazon, Epic Gardening, big shout out to Epic Gardening. You will have different places that will tell you the dimensions. Use that to plan out your spacing, because you're going to want to build these one at a time and then make sure this lines up with this, and you continue to keep it lined up. If you do not, you're going to have a mess. So in this case here, we made ourselves a 3-foot walkway, and we made sure when we needed to turn the wheelbarrow, we had room to go down this pathway and continue. And then we had 3 feet for the wheelbarrow to either go down this path or this path. Planning all your dimensions for this is really important, because you want to make sure you have the best room in your garden. If you do not, you're going to have a mess, because if you cannot get your tools back here, that's more to lead you to injury, falling over them. And the one rule that we've always had in the gardening is do not step in the garden beds. There's a reason. You may have seeds in there, you may have bulbs, you may have perennials. What you do when you put your footprint down into it is you're pressing down on the soil, and you want to make sure that soil is nice and loose. So what you're doing is compacting it with your own weight. Now, if you have no choice, you have to do what you got to do, but you have to make sure you plan it all out. I don't have any unfortunate examples of using stakes to plan this out, because this has been a project that we've worked over the course of 3 years, and I just know that planning is most important. And the other thing you want to consider, maybe you don't want to do low beds. The reason I say that is, as you get older, your knees hurt, it's harder to kneel down. I would consider going with these. It's very little room, very little issue other than getting soil and wood. And a lot of these beds are done with hugelkultur, which is basically we put compost, big logs, anything at the bottom to fill this thing up, and then we mix it with dirt, then we add more compost, then we put dirt. So what happens is underneath here, this soil is all getting broke down, and the wood underneath there is getting broke down over a course of 10 years, give or take, and every time it rains, it absorbs that water, so it does release some water into the ground when we start getting those droughts. that's what helps reduce a lot of the droughts and a lot of the issues with that. The other thing to consider too, the nice thing with these beds is they keep rabbits out. If you have a big area with rabbits, then you don't have to worry so much of them jumping up and eating your greens. I recommend putting lettuce and cabbage and a lot of the green beans in raised beds, unless they're a trellis where they go straight up, because you're always going to have pests, rodents, whatever you want to call them. I mean, God's creatures. They're going to try to get into your food supply as well. And not their fault, you know, they see food, but we have to be more proactive. The other thing that you have to consider is down here, we had a critter that dug deep down into here near the sage. Don't know what it was, and because of that, we have to replenish the soil here. If it was a taller bed, there's very few creatures that are going to dig down into that. So something was nesting underneath the sage plant here, but you know, if you're limited on cash. So the difference between a bed like this right here and a bed like I had just showed is night and day difference. I paid $60 pre-inflation for this here. It's a 4x4 square. The Epic, Birdie's Epics, I paid about $500 for a bed. So as you can tell, it's a night and day difference in cost. And to get the resources for the wood, for the compost, all the soil bags you had to fill up, or having to get a dump truck to come in, that adds up. Whereas here, you get some bags of compost, get some leaves from your neighbor's garden, and you throw all that in there, you've got yourself a bed way cheaper. So those are things to consider when you're planning a raised bed. The other thing you want to consider, and this is something that is really important, and I will show you. When you're looking at planning a raised bed, you're also going to have to ask yourself, is it going to be perennials or is it going to be annuals? These here is a perennial that comes up every year, and of course they got massive. This is my sage plant. This has taken up a lot of real estate. I would like to dig this up at some point without hurting it and transplant it into the ground somewhere, because this is just so large and it's eating up so much of the real estate here. Another one that you can consider, and this is one that you grow every year, thyme. And as you can see with thyme, this has also grown exponentially over the course of 3 years. But thyme is really good, and it doesn't take as much space as sage comparatively. But this is something you have to consider when you're looking at perennials in your raised bed. Also, the nice thing about thyme is it's an herb, and it does help repel pests. But as you can see, over the years, you have a lot of dead underbrush here that you have to be careful. You can break off, and you can use as compost. But you just got to be careful not to destroy the core root, because that will cause you problems in the long run. And of course, this is also where baby bunnies like to hide, as I've learned.
Also, on your thyme plant, when you take the underbrush out, if you are a bird watcher and you have a bird sanctuary or an area where you watch birds, putting this type of stuff into a little area they can use to make nests with for the spring.
Yeah, that's an interesting tip I didn't consider. And then the other perennial that I like using in raised bed, because this is a great companion plant with tomatoes. Tomatoes have a certain smell, certain chemical that repels the pests that attack asparagus, and asparagus have something that prevents tomatoes from getting attacked. Problem with asparagus, you got to have a lot of real estate to grow it, and I have been expanding this every year, adding more seeds to it. And here is the seed pods, for example. It's just a little, looks like a little tomato, and there's the seed. So, and the thing about it is, there's a rule with asparagus. You can't harvest too many the first year you plant it. Second year you can harvest maybe half of it. You got to let it keep growing, and then after the third year you can harvest probably close to 3/4 of it. As you can see though, we let this go because you have to have enough asparagus to keep the plant alive. If you harvest all of it, it's not sending power back down to the root system, and that root system is massive. It's just tubulars that'll come right up every year. And as you can see, we've got new growth here, new babies coming up here. So we have to be really careful when we do this, but this was a long-term bed. I cannot put anything really else in here except a couple tomatoes, maybe some stuff that can grow under here in the shade. That's stuff you need to consider when you plan your bed. So one thing I would recommend is get a journal. Mark out a schematic of each of your beds. Label them 1, 2, 3, 4, and then under each number, write what you want to plant. Do some research on each plant to see how much space they need, if it's a perennial or an annual, and then write the list out, and then get yourself a gardening square, which we will be showing soon how to use a gardening square. They're really cool. They give you accurate ways to just put down every single seed in the beds. That way you don't have overcrowding, you don't have competition, and you can have a more close, tight garden without wasteful space. So that's things to consider with your raised bed. So one other thing, then we've had this in the earlier video, so I don't know if you've caught this, but we'll show it again. You can build your own. It is costly. You can build raised beds like this using lumber. But if I were to build this again, I would have the lumber on the outside. We did this as cheap as possible to try this out originally. If I had my way, I would do the box on the outside and the corrugated metal on the inside. That way you have less time where these 4x4s are going to deteriorate. So probably in the next 3 or 4 years, we're gonna have to replace them. But more than likely what we'll do is just build a box on the outside of them this time around to rebuild them. But I think each one of these pre-inflation prices, we built these 4x8s for about $130 each. Now, that was pre-inflation prices. With COVID, they may or may not have went up, but you can consider basically those for cost savings.
Another thing Kai was saying, they do come in different shapes and sizes when you're shopping. So if you want a nice little round bed, like to put around a tree or to decorate in your front yard, the little round beds are just really cool for that. They're about 4 foot around. And you can also get nice little oval shaped ones, which are about 3 by 4. And they look beautiful when you are growing things in them. Right now we've got lettuce growing in here and some plants that we're going to pull because we have some cool crops going into winter.
Well, that's been some tips on today on planning your raised garden beds and things to consider when you're planning your garden bed. I hope you like this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. We have more coming out. I know it is closing in on winter time, but that doesn't mean the gardening stops, the planting doesn't stop, nor does a lot of the activity.